Good day all. I hope we all are safe and sound. Today I'm going to broadcast in a continuation and in sequence uh, of my lecture number 43, the MAIB case study. This is regarding the collision which took place at the Anchorage inside River Humber in United Kingdom. So, as all of my audiences have been watching the videos, of course, I'm broadcasting this uh, to basically help our own fraternity as a matter as far as exercising due diligence towards the safety of navigation is concerned. So we will now begin under my banner of Marine Quest Solutions. Please do like, share, and subscribe with the bell icon so you get to know the latest update as and how I'm broadcasting loads of things uh, on this portal from the navigation point of view. So the lecture number 43, MAIB case study, collision at Anchorage at River Humber. So we begin with it. This particular accident took place whilst I'll just read the whole thing about it, and then first I'll go through the whole case study, and then we'll try to see what perhaps could have been done to avert these kind of situations. And that's where the practical knowledge of the seamanship, master's experience, master's overriding authority, in cognizance with the VTS, port control, and the pilot's understanding shall also be taken into consideration. Dragging anchor by general cargo vessel Celtic Spirit and subsequent collision with Atlantic Explorer and Celtic Warrior at River Humber, England on 1st of March 2018. Now, this particular incident, what happened that, to explain you in a nutshell, to brief you, Celtic River, she anchored, and about three odd cables from her due northwest was the other vessel, Atlantic Explorer, and thereafter her own sister vessel was Celtic Warrior. So what had happened that the weather conditions, as we go down the run, we'll see it was Beaufort force 9, 8 to 9, and the tidal stream was around 2.7 knots, which was also setting northwesterly, and the wind was coming from easterly. So both the forces are acting upon the vessel. So one can understand what could have been the case and factuality, what the vessels must have been experiencing. So not to waste too much time, we'll talk about now the summary. At 0246 hours on the 1st March 2018, the UK registered general cargo vessel Celtic Spirit dragged its anchor in heavy weather on River Humber, that is England. The vessel subsequently collided with the research and survey vessel, which is Atlantic Explorer, and the general cargo vessel Celtic Warrior, which of course was a sister ship, which were also at anchor. All these vessels sustained shell plating damage, but there were no injuries and or no pollutions. So no injuries to the human or no human injuries and no damage to the environment. That is a good thing out of it. The MAIB investigation identified that Celtic Spirit dragged its anchor because of insufficient anchor cable had been deployed for the tidal range and the environmental conditions experienced. It was not immediately identified that Celtic River was dragging its anchor because the anchor position monitoring was inadequate. We'll talk about this, what perhaps could have been done. So right now we'll go through the report. Celtic Spirit bridge watchkeeper did not alert the vessel's VTS or nearby vessels that his own ship was dragging anchor. Probably he was not monitoring, as it was said in the line previously, that no anchor position monitoring was there, or it was inadequate. Point number 4, the Celtic Spirit was unable to maneuver in sufficient time to remedy the situation because of its engine was not on immediate readiness. Now, wind force was Beaufort force 8 to 9, and the tidal stream set was northwesterly 2.7 knots, and at that point in time also, nothing was kept in readiness and or standby. So I'll read this line again. Celtic Spirit was unable to maneuver in sufficient time to remedy the situation because of its engine was not ready on immediate readiness, and class conditions relating to the engine readiness while operating with only one anchor were not followed or understood. Lack of company guidance meant that there was an inconsistent approach to the engine readiness on board sister vessels in the same fleet. So this probably had been maybe a chronic problem with the companies even with a lack of companies guidance that probably had been experienced earlier, as well as it has been highlighted or reflected into this particular line. And last, Atlantic Explorer and Celtic Warrior were unable to weigh anchor in the time available because the wind force was Beaufort force 8 to 9. Tidal stream was again setting northwesterly, and there was a sea and swell as well. This is the condition of the vessel that is Celtic Spirit, where she sustained the damage on her port quarter, on a port quarter. This is I've just posted the pictures which are available as per the MAIP reports. So now let's talk about the ships particular. It's going down the rung, in the same order: vessels named Celtic Spirit, Atlantic Explorer, and Celtic Warrior. Mind you, Celtic Spirit and Celtic Warrior were sister ships and belonged to the same owner and same company. Both had a UK flag, whereas Atlantic Warrior was Panamanian registered ship, and the classification society for Celtic Celtic Spirit and the Celtic Warrior was DNVGL, and for Atlantic Explorer was PMDS. IMO numbers are written over here. Now we talk about the main salient features over here, or main salient points over here. The managers were Charles and Willie, that is for Celtic Spirit and Celtic Warrior C. For Atlantic Explorer, it was Atlantic Explorer Holdings Limited. Now, both the vessels, that is the Celtic Spirit and the Celtic Warrior, were built in 96, and they had almost same LOA, that is 89.72 was Celtic Spirit and 89.72 was Celtic Warrior, whereas Atlantic Explorer had a LOA of 70.57. The gross tonnage is also written, it's almost same except for 2 tons difference, that is between Celtic Spirit and Celtic Warrior. The minimum safe manning was 5, that is in both the vessels, sister vessels, Celtic Spirit and Celtic Warrior, whereas in case of Atlantic Explorer, it was 11. Now, the port of departure for Celtic Spirit was Grove Port, and for Celtic Warrior was Swansea, whereas for Atlantic Explorer it was Grimsby, that is the port of departure. Port of arrival was Riga, that was intended for Celtic Spirit, and Grimsby, that was for Explorer, because she is a survey vessel, and for Celtic Warrior it was Grove Port, because both the vessels were on probably fixed runs. And manning for Celtic Spirit was 8, number of people or crew on board, and for Celtic Warrior it was 8. In case of Atlantic Explorer, there were 23 souls on board. Now, marine casualty information, date and time, as what we mentioned earlier, was 1st March 2018 at 0246 hours. Type of marine casualty, serious marine casualty. Location of the incident, that is Hawk Anchorage, River Humber, UK. Where the accident took place, it was at Hawk Anchorage, River Humber, UK. Place on board, that was where the damage took place, was stem and quarter for Atlantic, this thing, Celtic Spirit, and for Celtic Warrior it was bow area, whereas for Atlantic Explorer it was port, bow, and shoulder. Now the damages which have taken place on Celtic Spirit are mentioned over here, and damages which were sustained to Celtic Warrior are over here, and Atlantic Explorer had a shell plating deformed and damage to anchor equipment. And all these three vessels were at Anchorage, that is at Hawk Anchorage. Now, the point which we need to see here also, what I mentioned earlier, external and internal environment. Wind easterly, force 8 to 9 with moderate seas. The predicted tidal stream was northwesterly at 2.7 knots. We'll see this further in the charts as well. The factual, now let's look into the statements of fact, what actually had happened. So we'll go about it, as I said, in all these MAIB incident or accident reports. I broadcast them as and how they are. However, at the end of it, under the heading of points to ponder, perhaps what could have been done to avert this kind of situation. Of course, this is not as a criticism, this is as a positive thing which should be taken in the stride as far as the practical knowledge of the seamanship is concerned. So the factual information narrative, where it says at 2120 hours, Celtic Spirit arrived at Home Hook Anchorage, that is from sea, coming from sea. Its master ordered the crew to let go its starboard anchor and lower foreshackles of anchor cable into the water. Shortly after anchoring, the bunkering operation was planned, and due to the bad weather, Celtic Spirit was unable to proceed on passage, and its master did not want to leave the port due to insufficient bunkers. After liaison with the pilot on board and the Humber VTS, master was advised to anchor his vessel in the Hawk Anchorage. So first she was at the Home Hook Anchorage, which is coming from sea, the first anchorage. Thereafter, the VTS and the pilot advised the master to take the vessel, of course, under pilotage to Hawk Anchorage, which is further inside the river, which we'll see on the chart. As he prepared to leave the Home Hook Anchorage, that is the master noticed that his vessel had dragged its anchor because, again, the environmental condition which we mentioned were Beaufort force 8 to 9 and predicted tidal stream was 2.7 knots, setting northwesterly. While on passage to Hawk Anchorage, that is now she is picked up her anchorage from Home Hook Anchorage as per the pilot and VTS, Humber VTS and pilot's advice. Whilst on passage on the Hawk Anchorage, VTS contacted Celtic Spirit and instructed its master to anchor in position hotel, that is the designated anchorage we'll see down the run. The vessel arrived at Anchorage at 22:55, and in accordance with the advice given by the pilot, 5 shackles of the cable were lowered into the water. The pilot monitored the vessel's position for about 15 minutes, during which the anchor appeared to be holding and the vessel was riding onto the cable with minimal pitching and rolling or yawing. At 2300 hours, Celtic Spirit master handed over the bridge anchor watch to the second officer. Now, this is something I'm a bit skeptical that the vessel arrived at Anchorage 22:55, and anchor was let go or dropped, and thereafter at 2300 hours, the master handed over the con to the second officer. Upon taking over the watch, the second officer set variable range markers and radar display based on the sperm head to the east and the research and survey vessels Atlantic Explorer. That is the position where she was, which was anchored 3 cables to the northwest. Now, the Atlantic Explorer, which was anchored due northwest of Celtic Spirit, was barely 3 cables to the northwest. The duty AB, the AB who had come on the bridge at the start of the watch was released by Duo to conduct routine fire and take safety rounds. Now, coming to this last para on this page, where we have to see few more things. At 2315, pilot advised Celtic Spirit Master that the bridge watchkeeper should remain alert with the vessel's engine on standby. Shortly afterwards, the pilot and the marine apprentice disembarked the vessel, and the master ordered the main engine to be stopped. Now, this is something which we will talk about it, that at 2315, after being on board for 15 minutes after Anchorage, the pilot and the apprentice who was accompanying the pilot, they had disembarked. And after that, the master ordered the main engine to be stopped. The master and the vessel engineers then went to rest in their cabins. The second officer remained on watch on the bridge where he completed the chart corrections, routine administration tasks, and fixed the vessel's position on paper chart every 30 minutes. Now let's see the chronology of the events. At about 0246 hours, Celtic Spirit began to drag anchor in northwesterly direction. That is in the figure 2A. We'll go down the rung and see that. 9 minutes later, in preparation for the watch handover, the vessel's second officer looked at the radar screen and noticed the distance to the Atlantic Explorer has decreased. He plotted the vessel's position on chart, which verified that the vessel was dragging its anchor, and called the master. So second mate, once he had all the reasons to believe, and which was evident as well, that the vessel is dragging anchor, finally he called the master. He also called the engineer in his cabin and ordered him to start the main engine, and he instructed the duty AB via handheld radio to go forward and check the anchor cable. You know, there's a say, what we say in English, stitch in time saves 9. We'll see the repercussions as we go down. So this is the Hawk Anchorage, where we mentioned that the vessel was anchored earlier, and now we see the Hawk Anchorage, which was depicted in a big, snapshot over here. From here, the vessel shifted to the home hook anchorage. That is, from this anchorage, the vessel shifted to this anchorage as advised to the master by the VTS and the pilot. And mind you, down this way is the entrance to the river, and after that, you're in the North Sea. You're coming into the open seas. So extract of the Admiralty chart is 1188 showing the home hook and the Hawk anchorage. Now, looking at the chronology, that is the figure 2A at 0246 hours local time, Celtic Spirit started to drag its anchor. This is the position of Celtic Spirit, which was barely 3 cables away from Atlantic Explorer. And Atlantic Explorer was the first vessel, and after that, due northwest of Atlantic Explorer was Celtic Warrior, the sister vessel of the Celtic Spirit, which was anchored. Now here, the wind easterly, Beaufort force 8 to 9, wind is shooting you this way, and the tidal stream setting this way northwesterly with 2.7 knots. So we can understand what sort of situation it was. At 0312 hours, Celtic Spirit collides with the Atlantic Explorer. Because at 0246 hours, when the second mate realized that his vessel is dragging anchor, he called the master, he asked the engineers to prepare the engine, but it was too little and too late. The time span was very short, and whatever action was taken was too little and too late. And finally, what happened at 0312 hours? Celtic Spirit collided with the Atlantic Explorer, which was barely 3 cables from our anchored position. That is, the initial distance between Celtic Spirit and the Atlantic Explorer was 3 cables. And mind you, the length overall of Celtic Spirit was 90 meters, and she started dragging onto Atlantic Explorer, and finally at 0312 hours they collided. And when Bofors at what we said was force 8 to 9. Now, let's see the further events. That is figure number 2, Charlie. The vessel drifting northwesterly after Celtic Spirit collision with Celtic Warrior. So now these two vessels started drifting due northwesterly. Both the vessels, that is Atlantic Explorer and the Celtic Spirit, after Celtic Spirit collided with the Atlantic Explorer. Environmental condition. The visibility was poor with intermittent snow blizzards. The wind was easterly at Beaufort force 8 to 9, and the sea state was moderate. Moderate was because she was in bit sheltered waters, because you won't experience moderate seas if you are out at sea with wind Beaufort force 8 to 9. It was 3 days before the spring tide, that is on 28th of February, low water at Grimsby was at 23071.2 meters, and on 1st March, the first high water at 0513, 6.9 meters. Mind you, 6.9 meters. Whilst the Celtic Spirit was at anchor, the tidal stream turned at 2352 hours. Began to set northwesterly and predicted to reach a maximum rate of 2.7 knots at 300 hours, 0300 hours. When the Celtic Spirit began dragging its anchor, the tidal height was 5.3 meters above the data. The reason I'm trying to impress upon these statements of facts, because at the end of the day we'll talk about it, discuss about it, what perhaps could have been done, and that is the reason I'm trying to impress upon, or trying to emphasize upon all these things which have been talked about, and then we will see what could have been the recourse. This is the chart what I've taken from the net for the same area. Somewhere here was the first anchorage, the Hawk anchorage, and then this place is the Home Hawk anchorage. Now, one thing which I failed to understand when the vessel which came, that is Celtic River, I'm not talking about, I'm right now not talking about the home, I'm not talking about the Celtic Warrior or the Atlantic Explorer. All I'm trying to say is that as far as Celtic Spirit is concerned, if the master, I know she was low on fuel, but the projected weather condition as per the weather report, which you get synoptically, and when you are in the post, in contact with the VTS or coast, they give you immediately online reports. Why could the Celtic Spirit master, could not stop here and started to drift here in this safe location, or whichever place he, under his professional experience, he could have thought would have been safe to drift? Because coming from the old schools of thought that if you are going to experience very rough weather, and in this case Beaufort force 8 to 9, the best thing is to head for sea. I understand the constraints what Celtic Spirit Master was experiencing because of shortage of fuel. He could have not probably entered into this area and not in first place anchored into the first anchorage where, because as per the statements of fact, the first report what we saw that when he picked up the anchor from the first anchorage, he realized the vessel had already dragged anchor and the weather conditions were almost same. So why in first place did he come here? Why could he not have waited over here till the weather would have subsided? So the probable drifting area under the force majeure could have been probably taken like this if it was construed safe. This is honestly speaking, Masters under his jurisdiction and Masters overriding authority, probably he could have requested, asked the VTS Humber, and the pilot notified him that okay, because it's an inclement weather conditions, I rather prefer to drift here. I prefer to drift here in open waters. Okay, use the engine bare minimum and try to sustain, hold your head. Worst case scenario, because in a forced majeure, if the weather had subsided, let's say the vessel had been coming furthermore low on fuel, I'm sure after the weather had subsided, he could have anchored with taking cognizance and approval from the VTS and Port State Control, of course, provided there are no, cables or nothing, no restricted area, no foul area, taking all those things into account. If he could have anchored after the weather had subsided, taking into consideration that the fuel was low, and then probably some other, things could have been done to get the fuel to the vessel or make her come under, circumstances where the force majeure is applicable, could have been done. But the thing which I failed to understand that the vessel, when she was inbound, she traversed all the way, must have picked up the pilot at the designated area. Then she anchored here under the pilot. She has already lost so much fuel from here to here. What if she had stopped here, waited and drifted? I'm not saying anchoring. Waited and drifted in this location till such time the weather had subsided. I think that would have been the perhaps uh, one of the better choice what he could have taken under the given circumstances. So that is the reason I've written probable drifting area under force majeure conditions. Now the analysis, the decision to anchor in heavy weather. The Celtic Spirit Master had left Govaport with intention of taking bunkers and proceeding directly on passage to Riga. However, when the bunker barge was cancelled due to weather conditions, the master was left with a choice of either proceeding to sea or anchoring in one of the designated anchorage until the weather abated sufficiently or bunkering to recommence, basically. That is, when the vessel had left the Grove port. Now, Celtic Spirit Master did not want to proceed to sea due to his concern over low bunkers. His decision to use the Hawk anchorage as a layover was influenced by advice of the VTS and pilot. Now, I'll read this line again. His decision to use Hawk anchorage as a layover was influenced by advice of VTS and the pilot. And that other vessels, including a sister ship, were already at anchor. Now, this was the place where this was probably the reason why the master also had been complacent, because his own sister vessel, his own company vessel, which was Celtic Warrior, which was already anchored due northwest, further northwest. So he must have thought that, okay, my vessel, sister vessel is anchored, which is of same dimension, same size, everything is same. Then I can also try to anchor over here. But mainly it was also influenced by the VTS and the pilot, his decision or his decision making. In addition, the Hawk anchorage was only short-term anchorage available, and that provides some shelter from the strong easterly winds. Strong easterly winds was one factor, but other thing is the tide, which was setting 2.7 knots due northwest, and the height of tide at that point in time was above the datum was 5.3 meters. In view of the limited choices available, Celtic Spirit Masters, the decision to lay over at Hawk Anchorage was logical. This is what the report says. However, given the environmental conditions, the risk of dragging anchor was high and appropriate controls should have been put in place. Perhaps due to change of plan and his concerns regarding availability of bunkers, the master placed an undue level of reliance upon BTS and the pilot. And he did not challenge the choice of either anchor position or length of the cable recommended. Now, if we read this statement again, it's basically topsy-turvy. It's indemnifying in one way master, on the other hand, it is indemnifying the VTS and pilot. At the same time, it is contradicting and putting partial blame on VTS as well as the pilot. So, what I fail to understand under any of these given circumstances, ultimately it is master's call. Because when the vessel is under pilotage, what we write in the logbook, under the vessel is under pilotage or proceeding from this point to this point, under master's command and pilot's advice. So pilot is just an advisor. It is finally master's call whether to accept or reject that advice. That is what I'm trying to home on upon. And of course, also reflects upon the practical knowledge of the seamanship. Now, coming to the final end of this report and lecture, as I always try to describe what could have been done, and that's where we come to this final session, that is the points to ponder and procedures for safe anchoring. Number one, we know the scope, that is prior to proceeding towards the designated anchorage area, scope is normally 6 times the depth of the water in which the vessel is planning to anchor, which is applicable. Now, this particular scope is applicable only for good or fair weather conditions. In case the weather expected to deteriorate, more cable has to be paid, which we'll see in the next slide. In addition to above, extra allowance for the vessel's freeboard and sea swell shall also be taken into consideration in order to lay off the catenary. Now, this is the catenary which I've drawn it over here on the whiteboard, and this is the catenary, the chain which is laid out properly. This is the thing which holds the vessel at anchorage. It's not the anchor. So, first and foremost, in my personal and professional opinion, if I were him, I would have head for sea and drifted in the location approximately what I marked over here in the previous slides. I would have done that. Till such time the weather subsides and weather becomes favorable, I would have drifted and we would have taken a call as and how it comes. Basically, we cross the bridge as it comes. So the scope I have described, it is about 6 times in the fair weather conditions. But in addition, the other factors which are to be taken into consideration are vessel's freeboard sea swell, because in this case, the height of tide was 5.3 meters above the datum. That means the more you go, because if suppose your chain is stretched, cable is stretched from here to here, that means what? If I draw it here and keep my chain stretched, what has happened? If you have a look at this, I will just draw it over here with the red pen. If the cable is stretched over here, this is your anchor. One minute, I'll just redraw this to make sure it's understood clearly. So your anchor is over here, and what has happened? Your catenary is disturbed now. Your catenary, which is over here, which was laid down nice and easy when you drop the anchor, is disturbed. So what happened? Your holding power is compromised. If I just put it this way, these two lines, your holding power is already compromised now. Because your holding power is compromised, obviously the vessel will be definitely dragging her anchor. This is the compromise of the holding power because the catenary over here is disturbed. And as per the thumb rule, there are those several methods used to calculate the amount of cable to be used when anchoring. These methods include number of shackles, that is 1.5 to the square root of depth in meters. Number two, length of cables in meters, that is 6 to 10 times the depth of the water. That is what I said, that under fair weather conditions, your scope should be around 6 times approximately, taking into consideration your freeboard, your sea swell, your rise of, height of tide, where it will make the difference, and of course, your weather constraints. But under Beaufort Force 8 or 9, it certainly is not advisable to anchor. It is better to head for sea. That is how it should have been, which we'll see further down in the next slide. Now, the swing circle. Now, what happens that the swing circle is calculated as per let me read this first, is normally calculated after the vessel is anchored. However, a good practice is to calculate the same prior to arrival at a designated anchorage and same multiplied with a factor of 3 as a safety margin as depicted in the example with subject vessel's LOA. Now, here I have explained for the swing circle calculation along with the safety margin. The subject vessel Celtic Spirit was 89.72 meters. I rounded off to 90 meters. So 90 meters multiplied by, this is under fair weather conditions, I'm calculating the swing circle. Under 90 meters is a LOA, and then you have 6 shackles if you paid out. Each shackle is 27.5 meters, all divided by 1852. It gives you 0.14 miles for 1.4 cables. Now 1.4 cables further multiplied by 3 times, that is the safety margin, safety factor, because in this case the subject vessel Celtic Spirit was anchored barely 3 cables from Atlantic Explorer. If she had more clearance, she would have had more time to assess that she is dragging anchor, but under the given circumstances, what I said, the first option I would do is head for sea. But if you're already anchored and there's an inclement weather which has set in for which you were not aware of it, at least give some safety margin to your vessel, which is try to anchor her away from other vessel as far as practicable. Taking the length overall of Celtic Spirit as 90 meters, this calculation I have carried out here. So it is coming to 4.2 cables. I would round it off happily to 5 cables. In other words, half a mile should have been the minimum clearance for this size of vessel, approximately under the circumstances where the weather is deteriorating or has deteriorated, if it was to be done. However, I do not undermine and I still stick to my first option. Had the option been there, I would have head for sea directly. I know I'm low on fuel, but then I can drift, at least save this kind of a catastrophe. Other things which matter as far as the anchor holding grounds are concerned, clay, though it's a good holding ground, but it has a sucking effect. And shingle and sand and soft mud are low holding grounds. Rocky bottoms, it is not recommended to anchor. So there are lots of things when we talk about anchors and what all the things, what all are, how would you know as a seafarer that how would you know that your vessel is dragging anchor? I will come back to that on my subsequent next follow-up lecture, subject to all of your feedback, because if My viewers want me to explain or tell them from the practical knowledge and assessment and the practical experience that what and how would we get to know in advance that our vessel has started to drag the anchor over and above using electronic media. There are lots of other things from the practical knowledge of seamanship, how you can assess that yes, whether your vessel is dragging anchor. Because if you're waiting until the string circle, expect 2 days. At the most, if you have exist, you will get an alarm on the exist, but it's a bit too late if your engines are not ready. Prior to that, there are lots of other things how you can ascertain that when your vessel is dragging anchor, how would you get to know? If you guys are interested, I will broadcast this into my next lecture. Please come back to me with your comments and with your whatever queries you have. If it is so, then I will certainly broadcast my lecture number 44 as how can you make out over and above, besides you have the electronic navigation, how would you ascertain the vessel has started to drag the anchor? I will explain that in a separate lecture. Now, last but not the least, as per the IX, that is International Association of Classification Society, the windlass is designated to pick up the anchor up to a depth of 82.5 meters, that is vertical. That means up to 3 shackles, and that too also in fair weather conditions. Because what happens if the weather deteriorates, like in this case, Beaufort force 8 to 9, like in case of Atlantic Explorer, she could not pick up her anchor. By such time, Celtic Spirit tried to pick up her anchor. She had already started dragging, and if the wind force is force 9, 8 to 9, and the tidal stream is setting you in the same direction, that is northwesterly, and wind coming from east, many a times very little you can do even with the main engine if your main engine is not very powerful. Trust me on this. All these things are part and parcel of the practical knowledge of the seamanship. So, ladies and gentlemen, this leaves a lot to be desired as far as further recourse. What could have been done, and how would we be able to ascertain whether a vessel is dragging anchor or not, and what other countermeasures could have been put in place, like if we talk about that from the point of view or from perspective of Swiss cheese model, what we could have done or what could have been done besides over and above. As I repeat myself, the first option would have been to head to sea, not to wait in restricted or congested waters and drift there. That would have been the best available action or possible action, taking the force majeure kind of situation into account. But then during this report, we have come across that master's decision was also influenced because of the VTS and the pilot. And that is where lots of things are happening, whether it's collision, grounding, or any kind of calamity, is because of the many a times, I'm not saying all the time, but many a times because of the master's decisiveness to rise to the occasion and rise to the occasion basically. And at present, like, the anchoring itself has become a critical operation. Why? Because of, again, lack of the knowledge, seamanship, and all those things. When I'm saying, you guys may think that I'm repeating all these things again, but yes, this is where there is a big void, where we need to fill up this void. So, once again, if you are interested for me to broadcast a separate lecture, that what precautions shall we take during anchoring, before we anchor, before we approach anchor, once we anchor, and in case the weather becomes inclement or deteriorates, how would we be able to ascertain well in time that the vessel is dragging anchor before your actor starts giving alarm on when it touches the swing circle, and what all the other modalities as far as the swing circle is concerned, how it is to be taken, and the due diligence shall be exercised. All these things I can explain in my next lecture, provided I get a feedback from my followers, from my students. Thank you. Good day. Stay safe.